Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing okay this morning. Morning for you, late for me, even though yes, it is still morning. Let's see, let me check my sound. Guys, I want to thank everyone who helps the channel. Your help is always appreciated, whether that's through Patreon, Super Chat, whether that's sending me videos, whether that's giving me tips, whether that's whispering in my ear about something. It's all appreciated. Thank you very much. Like I said, it's late for me, early for you guys. I didn't have necessarily any plans on doing videos today, but screw it. Let's do the videos that I want to do, things that interest me. Let's get toasted, do the news. And first up on this of the Get Toasted, Do the News tour, I missed the story. When the story first came out, apparently 221 people were killed by ISIS in Syria. Now, the 221 people, roughly half were civilians. Of that, half that were roughly civilians, some were killed in their beds, others were taken execution style. In some cases, some people were ferreted away to unknown fate. Others were soldiers. A suicide bomber set off a bomb with a vest, creating a certain amount of disorder and chaos. In other cases, villages were raided and the people were killed. This is a tragedy, however you want to call it. Now, the thing is, I understand that some of these people were soldiers, but like I said, many of these people were also civilians. And whether they were civilians or soldiers, it is a quirk of fate that you're sitting where you're sitting versus them laying in the bed in which a bloodthirsty maniac kicked through the door and put a bullet in you or cut your head off. It is a quirk of fate, whether you're a civilian or a soldier. In this particular case, it is an interesting way to see how mainstream media talked about it from the standpoint of their perspective. Now, the reason why I say it's an interesting way the mainstream media talks about this is because media, for the most part, are stenographers of the government. The government had a clear position that they wanted Bashar al-Assad removed. Media accrued around that particular position, and so they talked about the issue from that disposition. No one really brought up this thing of, maybe Tucker Carlson, what happens when Assad leaves? Now, this is despite, within a few years of earshot, a president that had destroyed Libya, and where you can purchase a black slave for what? I think $400. The irony of a black president leaving a country where you can purchase black slaves. I make this point to say that it's almost as if they're like a broken clock. Well, not even a broken clock. They have no memory. It's an amazing thing. But they would hit Syria and they would come to the same conclusion that they came to in Libya despite the chaos that was wrought in Libya. Now, what are we to do with this? Mainstream media looks at this particular issue through a very specific lens of, we want Bashar al-Assad to go. And they haven't changed that lens. But now you have something that's a tragedy where you have 221 people that's been massacred, slaughtered. How is media going to look at it? I think you already know how media is going to look at it. Look, the reason I bring this point of saying this could be you is because it literally could be you. It is a quirk of birth. Those people are living in a society, they're living in a culture, they probably feel as powerless as you feel in your culture to change things. Why haven't you fixed all of the issues that are in your society? In the same way you can say, why haven't they fixed the issues in their society? Yes, they're in a repressive society. But they were born and they were raised. They have a particular culture. that was invested into them, just like you have a particular culture that was invested into you. And I can almost guarantee you that the many people in that country don't want war and conflict any more than many of the Americans that if you left them to their own devices and you asked them, do you want to send people over there to murder and slaughter, will come to the same conclusions. Governmental apparatus is somewhat of a problem here, in addition to a population that's somewhat, let's say, relaxed and unfucking bothered, like nobody's business, to a ridiculous extent. If America is guilty of anything, it's apathy. You have a government that does X and a population that does nothing. A population that does nothing. Let's take a look at how media covered this. So just to give a more finer point, because that was just a summary. Death toll from Daesh attacks in Syria's Sweda exceeds 220. So-called monitor group says the death toll from the spate of attacks and bombings carried out by members of Daesh Tekfiriki terrorist group in Syria's southwest province of Sweda has passed 220. Look, there's another interesting quirk to this. We're helping these guys. Like, this is the people who we're on the side of. It's a war, so it's not one of those things where I'm blowing it out of proportion to the degree of saying one side of a war has no right to kill the other side of a war. I'm not playing that game. Both sides have been killing each other. I'm just making the point that these guys are our allies here, but these are the terrorists. If that government falls, these are the people who are going to take power. Bloodthirsty, head choppers. These are our people we're backing. Obama was so infused with this idea of geopolitical strategy that he can move the pieces on the board, and he was so smart that he can make this work, and he could get Bashar al-Assad out that seat. The United States, Britain, France, Qatar, Saudi Arabia have been dumping money into Syria opposition in order to get these guys to take down Bashar al-Assad. Israel has been assisting in this, also giving these guys to some degree somewhat of a safe haven in Golan Heights in order to create a buffer zone because they wanted to prevent Syria from getting close to Golan Heights. All of these forces have been instigating themselves in Syria. I will be all for Syrians themselves choosing in the same degree of self-determination. But what's taking place here is not Syrians choosing for self-determination. And this is a bunch of other nations, external forces, investing themselves into trying to remove Bashar al-Assad out that seat. What I would guarantee you is, in the same way you have grievances and gripes against your government, they have grievances and gripes against theirs. In the same way that you believe your government to be some degree repressive, I guarantee you they believe the same thing of theirs. What they don't want is a bunch of bloodthirsty maniacs running the government that's willing to chop heads and chop hands in the service of some sky god. That's what they don't want. They don't necessarily want Western powers dictating what they themselves need to change in their particular governments. No, it is an issue for Syria to decide. And this war, is not Syria deciding. This is Western influence. Look, my point is this. My point is simple and my point is basic. These people being killed from the standpoint of Western media, I want to show you the lens that Western media has looked at this. As opposed to, oh my God, this is a tragedy. Oh my God, these terrorists have killed all of these people. And no, they're not going to bring up the fact that we've been instigating ourselves into that conflict. That's never going to come up. Which means that you can never really get the honest story from Western media because they're never going to bring up that particular point. That point is not a minor point. That point is not a minor distinction. We've instigated ourselves in this. When it's talked about from the standpoint of our intervention, it's talked about as the rebels. Not the terrorists, the rebels. The people who are trying to topple the government. The rebels versus the terrorists. They don't call them what they are. the Free Syrian Army. It was a band of terrorists. Call it what it is. Because they don't call it what it is, you can never get the honest portrayal of what is taking place. You have a band of bloodthirsty terrorists, and if you don't believe me, listen to the stories of the people who are under the rule of those terrorists. How free of a Syrian army was it? Let's go through the story, because I'm spending too much time on this part. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said on Wednesday that the 3 attackers set off explosive belts in Sweda city, located more than 100 kilometers southeast of the capital Damascus. As to the blasts hit villages to the north and east, 4th bomb explosions hit the city later. Daesh members then stormed the villages in the provinces of northeast and killed residents in their homes. Observatory head Rahman said. Horrible with these names. He added that the bomb blasts and the raids claimed the lives of 222 people, including 127 civilians. The observatory noted that the remaining 94 dead were local fighters from pro-government popular defense groups who had taken up arms to defend the village against Daesh terrorists. Abdel Rahman highlighted that the death toll is expected to further rise as some of the wounded victims are in critical condition and tens of people remain unaccounted for. Alright, I'm putting this article at the bottom so you can read for yourself. But that's the basics of the story. Now, let's take a look at how this was covered. So this is Mint Press. I like Mint Press. Coverage of the recent ISIS attack shows Syrian civilians are only humanized when it serves pro-interventionist agenda. To Western media, the suffering and deaths of Syrian civilians matter only if the suffering can help further the pro-interventionist narrative promoted by Western governments over the past several years. You know, because the narrative that the West takes often is, there's something bad taking place in the world. There's something horrible over there. It is fucking infuriating over there of whatever that thing is that's taking place. And we need to do something about it. It bothers us so that we need to send somebody's kids off to die for it. Whatever it is. We need to send our kids off to die and kill for it. No, I am not going. I'm not going. But hey, I'm perfectly willing to allocate funds of other people's money to send your kid to go over there and kill or die for a particular cause. It makes no sense that we do this. Killing for humanitarian reasons is still killing. And ultimately, this idea of cause and effect of what is going to be the cause of the actions that you're taking doesn't seem to apply with regards to foreign policy. You destroy Libya, you turn it into a fire. Then you move on to the next place and try to literally do the same thing. Now, I can understand that there may be some kind of geopolitical strategy in this, in the sense of turning the Middle East into a fire. I don't know what that is. At least, I don't know what that is from the context of that not hitting us at some point. Chaos breeds terrorists. Daria, Syria. Amid recent successes of the Syrian military in retaking much of the country south from rebel groups, a devastating terror attack ripped through Syria's Sweda early Wednesday morning, resulting in the brutal murder of more than 220 people and injuring nearly 180. Daesh later claimed responsibility for the attacks and boasted of its success, citing the high civilian death count. Oh, that's awesome. Look how many people we killed. Yes! It's awesome! In keeping with Daesh's reputation of international terror group known for savagery, hundreds of Syrian civilians were murdered execution-style in their homes, many of them killed as they slept during raids, while suicide bombers also ravaged towns and villages in the area. Still more civilians were kidnapped, their fate unknown. Despite the gravity of attacks, the international consensus condemning Daesh, many Western media outlets treated the terrorist attacks as though it was simply a battle between warring factions in the Syrian conflict. The reporting of those outlets in this particular incident is particularly stunning, given that those same outlets often strongly condemn Syrian military operations for the effect on civilians, but failed to do that when a reviled terrorist group was to blame for the deaths of hundreds. Reuters, for example, did not mention the involvement of Daesh in the headline of its articles of the attacks, which was titled, "More than 200 Dead in Southwest Syria Amid Government Offensive." As the title hints, the article suggests that the killing of civilians by ISIS was a consequence of the Syrian government's military offensive in the south. I think that's it. It's spelling error. It also fails to label the attacks as an atrocity, instead of asserting that more than 200 dead are merely killed as a result of fighting, not bothering to mention that many were murdered, execution style, or killed in their beds. Another Reuters article, written in tandem with the Associated Press and Israeli newspaper Haaretz, was titled, "At least 96 killed in ISIS suicide attack in pro-Assad Syrian city near Jordan border." By using the term pro-Assad, which is often used by the Western press to dismiss critics of the foreign-funded Syrian opposition, to refer to the civilians that were targeted, it is by association labeling them as supporters of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who has been demonized as a murderous despot in the Western press for years. Understand what they're saying here. This is important. The Western press has called Assad an animal. He's an animal. They literally call leader of another country an animal. Well, George Bush kills 1 million people. Tony Blair kills 1 million people. But Assad, he's an animal. He's an animal. Whether he's a bad guy or not is kind of besides the point. They've heaped such criticism and despotism on him that any association with him is to some degree to be tarred by him. So if you say you're pro-Assad and you're pro-government, then for the most part, are fair game to be knocked off without a person feeling all that bad about it, seeing as that you're pro-despot. Now this is lunacy, of course. Somebody may vote Democrat, but it might necessarily be on board for the Democratic Party. Same thing with Republican. There may be certain things that they like and other things that they don't necessarily like, but feel that they don't have a reason to dislike it or have no other choice. If you believe that the only thing standing between you and a head chopper being in power is Assad, I would wager that you too would scream out his name to keep him to hold back the night. It has nothing to do with whether or not you like everything that the guy does. In their very particular case, they have their lives on the line. They were probably choosing, we choose him over the religious maniacs that are trying to break down the door. Just saying, it's a good point. But Western media doesn't look at it that way. They don't look at it that way. And the words that they use are buzzwords. It's like dog whistles. Let's see. In addition, as the previously mentioned Reuters article, the author suggests that Wednesday's ISIS attack was a logical consequence of the Syrian government's offensive through the south, which works to subdue outrage regarding the senseless violence of the attacks. Meaning, look, the reason that they killed him was because the government has been pushing further into that region. Well, yeah, but they just killed a lot of people and, it's the government. Are there other ways to change the governmental order as opposed to being bloodthirsty, religious, theocratic maniacs? Is there? It's almost a way of excusing the attacks. Tone dictated by media agenda. The tone of the coverage on Wednesday's attacks is markedly different from that found in articles of the same outlets regarding military offensives launched in Syrian military. For instance, a joint Reuters-Haaretz article on the Syrian military's offensive in southwest Syria carried the title, "Assad Regime Pounds Syrian Southern Syria's dozens of civilian casualties reported. That's pretty aggressive. The article itself dehumanizes and mourns the civilian deaths from airstrikes in southern Syria and squarely criticizes Assad-led government for those deaths in damning terms not even applied to Daesh and coverage on Wednesday's attacks. Furthermore, Wednesday's death toll dwarfs the cited in the article on the military offensive, meaning they're using these harsh, brutal terms to decry the government is killing people. Yeah, good, because the government is killing people. And you should use those harsh terms. But shouldn't you also use those same harsh terms when a bloodthirsty group of terrorists go in to murder a bunch of people, many of which were innocent civilians? Why are you so harsh in one, but less so in the other? That's the point that the author is making. Why indeed? Look, I'm putting this article at the bottom also. Here's another one. Another Western outlet, the UK's Guardian, also treated the civilians who were brutally murdered by Daesh very differently from those killed by the Syrian or the Russian airstrikes. For instance, in its coverage of Wednesday's attacks, the Guardians called Daesh raids and suicide bombings a surprise offensive, a term usually to refer to military operations, not terrorist attacks. However, earlier this month, The Guardian devoted an entire article to humanizing the suffering of Syrian civilians who were forced to sleep outside after the Syrian military assault resulted in panic-stricken exodus of Syrian rebels and their families. Yet, for the 220 victims of Daesh's attack on Wednesday, such concern was absent in The Guardian's coverage. Guardian reporting on murderous atrocities of Syrians of ISIS in Sweden, not an offensive, it was a murderous terrorist attack on civilians. Defeats of ISIS due solely to Syria, Russia, and allies, not United States-led illegal coalition whose attacks on the SAA positions enable ISIS to take over. It's fascinating when you do coverage and you don't actually do coverage. Like when you do a story, but you're not actually doing a story because you're leaving out a vital component of the story. That is, your government has been doing things that it has no business doing and has been helping abandoned terrorists. And other governments to which we are close to have also been helping those terrorists by hiding those terrorists out in certain parts of the Golan Heights in their region. The media doesn't want to say that. And because they don't want to say that, they have to write these stories in these weird, contorted ways. It's amazing. All right. I'm going to end this because this has gone far too long. But you get the point. At least I hope you get the point. It's early, so I have no expectation of anybody being here. Right here. You really need to understand the circumstances of the desperation cry for someone willing to just blow themselves up. There's others to make a point. It's not just religion involved here. No, dude, I agree. That's not the impression I want to give here. I don't think people do this for religious reasons. I think religion is the overlay for this. I think the reasons are usually either economic or something that's taken place. Meaning, there's something that they're even being deprived of. This aberrant behavior doesn't necessarily just happen out of a vacuum. There are things to which they are finding themselves into. I don't think anybody in their right mind would prefer to blow themselves up if they had another option of blowing themselves up. Yes, you can get people wrapped into a religion in this cultish way. But there's something that makes people susceptible to that. That's not just the everyday thing that takes place. That is something that happens within a context that makes people susceptible. Has nothing to do with their race, has nothing to do with their religious basis, has everything to do with where they are and what they're experiencing. The aberrant behavior doesn't come out of a vacuum. That's my point. Yeah, I'm not putting that on you, Jay. Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, I just don't want you to, I don't look at this as being a purely religious thing. Bill Maher and Sam Harris
talks about this stuff as if this stuff is just purely religious context. Like, oh, these people are in a cult. They're out of their mind. They're out of their gourd. And missing the point that if Sam Harris and Bill Maher were in those people's shoes, they would be doing the same fucking thing. Sam Harris and Bill Maher are no better than the terrorists who are doing that stuff. They're not. None of us are. All of us, put in their particular situation, would end up either dealing with forces that are pushing us to behave in a particular way. We may deal with it in incremental differences. But in their context, we would likely be them. We're not better. I guess that's my point. If you want that to change, there needs to be some understanding of why they're doing it. And it can't just be the terrorists, we need to kill them, because there will be somebody else who will be coming behind them. I guarantee you, if that edifice exists that creates some level of incentive for them to move through that particular path, there will be others who are moving through that path. It's somewhat self-evident by the fact that these existed, that others will come behind them. If we need to come together as a planet to figure out what's causing that, we need to figure out what's causing it, and not through militaristic means. There would never be a military answer to that. There's a reason why Japan and Germany didn't turn out to be hellscapes after that war. We rebuilt both countries. We rebuilt both countries. And I guarantee you the fact that those countries were rebuilt in many respects led to their success as nations right now. We did the opposite with what we've done by destroying Iraq. Maybe there needs to be some level of reparations with this idea of rebuilding the Middle East. So I'll leave it at that. This one has gone massively too long, but I hope I made my point in the video. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks everyone. It is early. I'm running out of steam. But I might have another one or two in me, so you may see me in a few. Thanks guys.